Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sam, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our next virtual event with Peace Adzo Medie and Mathangi Subramanian to discuss, Peace's debut novel, I have another chance later, His Only Wife. We are so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this uncertain time and reach even outside of LA. So thank you so much, especially for being with us. And we'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, which you can learn more about on our website, as well as our social media at BookSoup. And you can also sign up for our email newsletter on our website to get information directly to your inbox. Our next event is scheduled for Monday at 6 p.m. with Rob Bell and his son Preston Bell to discuss Rob's latest book, Everything is Spiritual. For regular updates, like I said, feel free to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on our social media. Today's virtual event will end with a Q&A. So to submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. It's right below the viewer screen. And if you see a question on the list that you can like it and it'll bump it up in the queue. And we will try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Also, please consider supporting our bookstore and our authors today by purchasing a copy of today's featured book, which you can do by clicking the green button below. Also, right below the viewer screen, it'll redirect you to our website where you can finish the checkout process, and it doesn't interrupt the viewing, so you can purchase at any time. And I will share Mathangi's book as well in the chat area. So with that said, let me introduce our guest speakers for today. Peace Adzo Medie is a Ghanaian writer and senior lecturer in gender and international politics at the University of Bristol in England. Prior to that, she was a research fellow at the University of Ghana. She has published several short stories, and her book, Global Norms and Local Action, The Campaigns to End Violence Against Women in Africa, will be published by Oxford University Press this year. She is an award-winning scholar and has been awarded several fellowships. She holds a PhD in Public and International Affairs from the University of Pittsburgh and a BA in Geography from the University of Ghana. She was born in Liberia. Mathangi Subramanian is an award-winning Indian-American writer, author, and educator. She is a graduate of Brown University and the Teachers College of Columbia University and the recipient of a Fulbright as well as other fellowships. Her writing has previously appeared in the Washington Post, Quartz, Al Jazeera America, and elsewhere. A People's History of Heaven is her first work of literary fiction, and I will share the link to that book as well. And I'm so excited to welcome these brilliant women. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today. And I'm going to pass it along to you now. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that we were going to start by, Peace, will you read some of your beautiful book for us to get started?
Okay. Yes, I will do that. Thank you for the introduction, Samantha, and thank you everyone for joining us. So before I read, I will tell you a bit about the book. So my book is titled His Only Wife, and it tells the story of Afi, a young woman in Ghana who finds herself in an arranged marriage. This marriage has been arranged by Auntie, who happens to be with a very wealthy benefactor of Afi's family. And she's arranged this marriage between Afi and her son, Eli, because she does not approve of Eli's partner. And so Afi has been given this task to make this marriage work and to bring Eli closer to his family. And what we learned from the very first sentence is that Eli does not show up for the wedding. So I'm going to read from the beginning of the book. It's not the first page, but from the fourth page, and this scene happens when Afi is getting prepared for her wedding. So it's a few hours before her wedding, and she's indoors getting dressed and waiting for the guests to arrive. So I'll read. It's going to be about 5 minutes. Mausi, one of Togan Pius's daughters and the cousin to whom I was closest, strolled out of the bedroom and began dabbing my face. My eyelids fluttered close as a white handkerchief, which she wielded like a surgical tool, migrated from the bridge of my nose to my forehead. It was immediately replaced by a sponge from a compact that she had fished out of a small, rhinestone-encrusted clutch tucked into her armpit. It's enough, I said in protest as she lightly brushed my cheeks. This was the fifth time that she had touched up my makeup in the last hour. I couldn't have been sweating that much. I wasn't nervous, not then anyway. I was mostly weary. Since my mother told me that I'll be marrying Ellie, I had felt as though I was balancing our two families like a basin of water, which was full to the brim on my head. It wasn't easy being the key to other people's happiness, their victory, and their vindication. I desperately wanted the wedding to be over because then I would have done my part, or rather, I would have begun to do my part. Ah, it's okay. You're only adding to my stress with all this makeup, I protested, when Mousie's hand and the makeup sponge continued to hover in my face. Stress? Haven't I told you to relax? There's nothing to be stressed out about. You should be happy and smiling. She was glaring at a small pimple on my chin as she spoke. You make everything sound so simple. I barely know the man. And what if things don't work out? What if this marriage doesn't make him leave the woman? What if it doesn't bring him closer to his family? And what if I let everyone down? His family, my mother, the whole town. I couldn't sleep last night just thinking about this, I said in a whisper because we weren't alone. Everybody says he's a good man, so there's no need to be afraid. I sighed heavily, not caring that she was standing so close that I was exhaling into her face. My cousin was obviously too overcome with excitement to have a proper conversation. In fact, it was as if she wasn't even listening to me. As soon as she freed me, I lowered myself onto a coffee table to give some relief to my feet, which were crammed into cream pointed toe pencil heels. Is it clean? I heard my mother call out from across the room. She was overseeing the stacking of plates onto the dining table. The plates would be used to serve Ellie's mother, his uncles, his siblings, and their special guests from Accra. They would eat plates of fried rice, grilled chicken and pork, and vegetable salad inside the house at the table, unlike the others who would eat their akple and goat okra soup outside, where they had watched the ceremony. The caterer would soon return with the chafing dishes My mother had placed the fried rice order herself, reluctant to leave this task to my aunties who were in charge of the food. I sprang to my feet as she bustled over to us in her floor-length fitted skirt. Give me the handkerchief, she snapped at Mousie, who was still shadowing me and now appeared to be stricken with guilt. She had failed in her duties as my attendant. My mother folded a handkerchief to hide the side that was covered with brown face powder and began carefully dabbling at my backside. She couldn't risk any of the sequins coming loose. Afino, let me do it, Mousie offered, but my mother swatted her hand away. Mousie flinched and looked at me with a mix of exasperation and pain. Don't mind her, I mouthed. 3 months before I wouldn't have been afraid to give sound to my words, but now I dared not. This wedding was so important and my mother so anxious that all go according to plan that I expected her to throw a fit at any moment. She wanted everything to work out perfectly, for Ellie to be satisfied with me, for Ellie's mother, Auntie Faustina Gagnon, to get back her son, for us to enjoy the status that will surely come with being tied by marriage to the Gagnons. So I will stop there.
Thank you. Peace, I love this book so much, and I'm so excited to be in conversation with you today. So thank you so much for having me. So the premise of this book is just fantastic. So as you were saying, Afi is having an arranged marriage and she's doing it to please another family. And I think sort of throughout the book, it feels like people want her to be a victim, but she kind of refuses to be a victim, right? Without giving too many things away. So can you tell us a little bit about how you found Afi's voice and how you came up with the premise? Like what inspired you to actually write this voice and this person and this situation?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that question and thank you for joining me in this conversation. So I had been thinking for a while about young women and the expectations that are placed on young women. And so I knew that I was going to write a story about a young woman who was under some kind of pressure. And Afi didn't start out as Afi. There were variations. There were different young women in different situations, and I just kept working at it and until I got to Afi, and then she felt right. But I always knew that I wanted to write a story like this, one in which a young woman is subject to, pressure from different sides and has to kind of navigate and find her voice. And I think the voice comes out of the situation, in that I wanted to reflect. So I guess taking one step back, Afi is a young woman from a relatively poor family who has not made it as far in her education as she'd wanted. And so in writing, I wanted the voice to reflect. I didn't want it to be me speaking, but a person in that situation. Um, and I wanted the observations that would be made to align with what someone in that situation would observe and would think. So yes, I think so the voice basically is a product of Afi's socioeconomic status, her background, and that she's in this situation where she's subject to pressure and she's not always able to speak out. So a lot of she's reflecting on a lot of things. Um, she is in some places sarcastic, in some places she uses humor, but partly because she's not able to express herself to people as she would like to because of the situation in which she finds herself.
I love her humor, and I feel like her humor it sort of develops with her, with the book, so that by the end she's got this sort of perspective that I think is just so rewarding to read when you see her journey. And that's interesting that you try a few other voices first. So this might be something that you can't necessarily pinpoint or articulate, but what was it about this voice that felt like it clicked into place for you and that felt different than the other women that you tried?
And I think I liked her story, right? So there were other versions, but there were also other stories and different trajectories. And I loved the person that Afi was. I loved the situation in which she found herself. And I loved the path forward that she had that the other characters did not have. That I didn't think they would have progressed the way that Afi progressed naturally. Yeah, so that I think that's what made me connect with her.
Speaking of how she progressed, did you ever, when you were writing, did she ever surprise you? Like, were there any points in the plot where she did something that you didn't necessarily think she was going to do?
Totally. I
mean,
but that's just when I write, that always happens when I write, because I like to say I do a lot of my writing in my head, and I think I know exactly what's going to happen. I have a good idea of the ending, and then I start writing, and the characters just refuse to cooperate, and they do it. And I don't, without giving away I can't like give examples without giving away the plot. But there was just so many things that she did. The ending, I thought the ending would be different. But as the story developed, the ending changed, and which I think is an excellent thing, in that allowing characters to take control of the story, such that it's not me imposing what I want, but it's the characters developing realistically.
Yeah, I agree. But did you ever feel any resentment to her for changing the story, or it felt good when the story changed? I sometimes get resentful. That's why I'm asking.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When you plan something out and then it just completely goes a different way.
No, I did not. I did not feel resentment, but it's just because I had so much fun writing it. I have a lot of fun writing fiction. And if it's changing because I'm enjoying the direction in which it's going. So there's definitely no resentment. Was I surprised? Yes. Were there moments when I thought, oh my goodness, Afi, do not do that? Yes. But there was no resentment.
I love that. And you can tell that you have such affection for the character and the way that it's written. It's such a, I don't know, it's such a like loving portrait of this woman. And that's one thing I really love about it. But you mentioned this often happens when you write fiction, but you're also like a very successful scholar, and you've published quite a bit about gender and, you know, sort of a lot of the issues that Afi is going through. So can you talk a little bit about how you go between those two registers of academic and fiction, and what sort of motivated you to tell this story through fiction as opposed to, because you have access to many different ways to write, right? Because you know how to write nonfiction, you know how to write academic work. So what made you choose fiction for this particular character and story?
Well, that's an excellent question. So my fiction and my nonfiction is very closely connected. So this particular novel and this focus on social norms and social pressures is a product of my research. I study a variety of things, but one of the things I study is how social pressures affect women's lives, affect women's relationships, how gender norms shape women's lives. And for my dissertation, I did work in Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire on intimate partner violence. And I spent quite a bit of time speaking to a variety of people, including survivors of intimate partner violence and social workers, people who worked in domestic violence shelters. And one of the things that kept coming up in these interviews was how women would say, I wanted to leave a relationship, but someone told me not to do it. My mother, my sisters, my friends pressured me into staying in this relationship in which I wasn't happy. And so that really got me thinking about the things that we do as people because of social pressure, especially as women. And most of the people I spoke with were young women, so we really wanted to explore that. And so that's kind of where the book began. But at the same time, I didn't want it to be like my research. So I only had one rule when I was writing this book, one rule for myself: there could be no violence. Because my work is on violence. I spend way too much time thinking about violence, writing about violence. And this was supposed to be me stepping back and doing something that just wasn't so heavy, in that wanting to explore these big themes without bringing in violence, right? So talking about social pressures and relationships without making violence the focus, right? So that is why, or that is how my nonfiction kind of influenced the book. And then the question about why did I choose fiction to tell this story? Well, one thing is I wanted to take a step back from my academic work. It's just all consuming and writing I'm one of those people who just is not, I don't have a lot of skills. I don't
I mean, your resume doesn't look like that, but go ahead.
I don't do any, I can't do any, I shouldn't say I can't. I don't do any sports. The only sports I do is walking. It's like normal, average walking. So it's like, it's not like weekends I'm going to get on my bike and like go riding or go hiking or climbing or whatever. All I do is write. So when I want to take a break from writing, I write.
Right.
Anyway, I'm planning on developing new skills so that it's not the only thing I know how to do. I need other talent.
Don't do that. We want more books from you. Don't develop any new skills until you write your next piece of fiction. After that, you're allowed.
But yeah, so I wanted to take a break from, actually not take a break, do something else that just wasn't my work on conflict and gender and violence. So that's why I decided to write this book, and that I chose fiction. but also as I was writing, so I use fiction to teach.
Mm-hmm.
In my classrooms, I use fiction to teach about international relations. I use fiction to teach about gender and politics. So I remember thinking I wanted to be a book that you can use to teach, but at the same time does not read like a textbook.
Mm.
Right. And I kept thinking, yeah, I want it to be something I can ask my students to read and we can discuss without them feeling like they're reading an academic article. So I thought, so that was another reason why fiction was a good choice for me, in telling this story.
I love that. I would love to take your class if you teach it with fiction too. That sounds like a great class. So when you were, so I have a little more of a follow-up question to that. So I'm especially interested in this because my book actually started out as an academic project. So I actually wrote academic papers before I wrote my book. And there were certain things I felt like I was writing through fiction that I couldn't really express in an academic kind of scenario, that only fiction could really tell, sort of like the truth of the situation. Did you feel that at all with this book? Were there things you could talk about in this book that you can't necessarily talk about in the same way in an academic world? Or do you feel like it's just sort of a different telling?
Well, I think what fiction so when you do academic writing, as you know, you're like, this is my theory, these are my sources. Everything that you're saying is either backed up by the literature or is backed up by original data that you've collected. And with fiction, I don't have to worry about sources. I don't have to worry about am I saying something that's provocative, and am I saying something that I can't support empirically. There's none of that pressure. So I think that's, yeah. So for that reason, it works better for me, and it allowed me to say things that I wouldn't say in the classroom, or that I wouldn't say in writing an academic paper, because I didn't have like either the theory to back it or the empirical evidence to back it.
I love that, because sometimes, you know, you have these intuitive feelings about a situation and there's no paper that represents it, right? So I really like that was like how you wrote about it. So another thing I really loved about this book is, as I was reading it, I felt like I could have been reading about India, right? Like about a nation that's just so rapidly developing and everything is changing and everybody is trying to change with it. But at the same time, one thing I love about the book is that there's something that's just so, I mean, I've never been to Ghana, but there felt like there was something so essentially Ghanaian about the place, even as things were changing. So as you were writing, how did you both capture the sort of rapidly changing, rapidly, I don't want to say modernizing necessarily, but definitely, you know, westernizing in some ways country, but then also help readers understand the essence of the country, as that is like there were certain scenes that I felt like could maybe not have happened in other countries. So how did you pick out those scenes, and how did you help readers understand the essence of the place that is changing so quickly?
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question. There's a lot of nostalgia in my writing. So part of the book is set in Ho. It's a town in Ghana. I spent most of my childhood in Ho, and I only realized this when I was writing, like working on my second novel. I was like, oh my gosh, it's set in Ho again. What's happening? And I didn't plan it, but I realized that I miss what it was like in my childhood. It was a kind of place that you can, and I'm sure people still do it, but when I was young, I could just walk around neighborhoods and everybody would know who you are. Right? Everybody knows your family, and they'll be like, well, whose child is, it's never who's like, what's your name? It's like, whose child are you? Kind of those kind of questions, right? People know you, and I could walk about at night. Like us kids could just walk around at night, and that's something I don't comfortably do anywhere outside of in Ghana, or anywhere outside of Ghana. I just don't do that. So there's a lot of nostalgia in my writing, and in some ways, I guess I'm a bit sad that things have changed so rapidly, and it's definitely captured. I try to capture it in the story, and I use the characters. So I think both of your questions, how do you capture rapid change, transformation, but also how do you get people to see it and understand this different culture? I just use the characters, the things they say, how they observe, the observations that they make around, about the places around them. Like the fact that Afi moves to Accra, and as she's dealing with things like going shopping, you get to see how Accra itself is a place that's changing. Yeah, so definitely I use the characters, whether it's them speaking or them thinking or the conversations they have. I try to get at the change that's happening within places. And but also when it comes to like helping people understand the place, I don't want people to feel, I think going back to my earlier points, I don't want people to feel like they're reading a textbook. I don't want people to feel like they're reading a cultural studies book about Ghana. Right. And so when I'm writing, I'm really not focused on, I want you to know about a place or a culture or anything. What I'm describing is essential to the story. That's why it's in the story. But I'm really not very concerned about someone who is not Ghanaian, having to learn about Ghana. I think if you learn, it's secondary, and that is awesome. But that is not the most important thing when I'm writing.
No, I really love that, because I feel like, especially with books that are published in the Western world that are set in other places, sometimes authors get pressure to sort of define the place for a Western audience, and your book doesn't feel like that at all. It sort of feels like, like, here's my world, and, welcome to it, and I'm going to tell you what you need to know. And so I'm wondering if when you were writing, did you have an audience in mind? Like, did you have a Western audience in mind, or an African audience in mind, or you just wrote and this is what happened?
I definitely had an audience, Ghanaian women. And nice. I thought, I just want Ghanaian women to read this book. I wonder what they're going to say. Are they going to hate it? Are they going to disagree? Like, I was very concerned about that. And it didn't limit me. What it did was make me work to ensure that I was true to the place. Right? Because I thought people who live here are going to read this book, and I want them to like the book, but I want them to read it and be like, oh, definitely, I recognize what she's talking about. Right? So for me, it was like, as like Ghanaian women, other African women are going to read it. That is what I was focused on. And I remember when I got to the end, I thought, is it realistic? I just had this sudden concern that it wasn't. So I thought, wait, have I influenced Afi as a character? I was afraid about that. So then I went and asked friends, like, would you have done what Afi did? Do you think what Afi did was realistic?
What did they say?
Well, yes.
Okay.
No one said, oh, this is outlandish, this could never happen. No one said that, which made me very happy, because I didn't want, because I feel she's so different from me, that I didn't want my own biases or my own politics to seep into Afi's life and then force her to do things that someone in her position would normally not do.
Speaking of characters, so first of all, before I forget, I see one question in the queue. If you guys have questions, I can just keep asking these questions. So please put questions under the ask a question thing at the bottom there, and I'll keep looking at them and try to weave them into the conversation. But before I look at the first question, speaking of characters and their like sort of realisticness, I loved Eli's mom's character. Not only because she was just, I mean, again, I feel like I have women like that in my family. I think there's something like so universal about her. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of her character? And without giving too much away, is it Ellie or Eli? I'm sorry.
Ellie.
Ellie. Okay, so Ellie is the husband that Afi is set up with. And Ellie's mom is kind of the mastermind behind everything. And she also sort of controls the village and is just this very formidable woman. And she's an amazing character. So could you talk a little bit about how you came up with her character?
Well, so I didn't want her to be the stereotypical mother-in-law, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in every culture, there's the mother-in-law that people don't like.
Totally.
And my thing is that people, when I write, I like to clearly show that people are so complicated. People are so multidimensional. It's rare that you meet someone and someone is just like terrible all the time to every person. So yes, Ellie was going to have a mother who was going to play an important role in his life. And I know a lot of very women who are like Auntie, dynamic, hardworking, successful. They've made their own money. And I wanted a character like that who embodies these strengths as well. But she also has weaknesses, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But yes. So I wanted to bring all of this into one character. So where she's a character who has she's a great person. She does, as we learned early on, she's been really nice to Afi's family.
Mm-hmm.
But also there are parts of her that are not so nice.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all very realistic. And as people, we seek to protect our interests.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, that is what she was trying to do. So I mean, I do hope that in writing, this complexity shines through, where she's just not the evil mother-in-law that doesn't have any strength to her, any kindness to her, because she's more than that.
Yeah, I think one reason I liked her, because of what you're saying, is both, she and Afi are both fighting for their families, right? They're doing everything they need to do for their families, but unfortunately, they both have different ideas of what their families need. And so it was such a beautiful contrast, and I felt a lot of sympathy for her, which I didn't really expect to at the beginning of the book. So she's I love her. She's just such a great character. So we have some questions from the audience. So the first one is, what was the most challenging part of writing this book?
The most challenging part was the time, balancing it with everything else that I have to do, because I happen to have a career that requires me to write books and articles and research grants and policy papers. So when I began writing the book, it's something that I was supposed to be doing in my spare time for the most part, but it did take up quite a bit of my time. And there was constant guilt, because I kept thinking, well, you do have a full-time job, and there's a requirement that you should publish a book in order to advance in your career, and you have not published an academic book. So how is it that you are writing fiction? And I did speak to a couple of colleagues and who were like, what are you doing? Like, you haven't published an academic book. Do you not want to get promoted? So then I just stopped telling people that I was writing fiction, because I thought they would say, well, you are not smart because like no one's going to pay you for writing fiction. You get paid for being a social scientist.
Yeah.
So there was, I did continue writing, but there was a constant guilt and trying to find the time to write a novel. So I think that was the hardest part. The actual writing, I loved it. It was just great taking breaks and writing fiction. I totally enjoyed it.
I really appreciate you saying that. I mean, I also wrote my book with a full-time job, and I feel like there's there's this conception that all authors do is sit and write, and really, like, many of us are balancing work and family and all of these other things, and writing is like actually the third or fourth priority, but it's something that you love, and so you keep doing it, right? So I think it's so important to be honest about those kinds of things and how much time you have and how it is a challenge. So I really appreciate you saying that. And I hope, anyone watching who wants to be a writer, I hope that you keep that in mind, that, don't let time stop you, because you just have to find a time. Okay, this next question is a really good one. Although Afi's story is finished, I feel like there's much more that I want to know. Do you have any plans to write more about her?
So that's a question that I've heard quite a bit since the book came out, which I think is a good thing, that people connect with the character so much that they want to know more. Well, for now, there are no plans to continue with Afi's story, but this doesn't mean that it would never happen. But it's not something I'm doing now.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so the next question, thank you both for the work you do and taking the time today to chat with us. So we talked about the balance between sharing a story from your culture with an awareness your audience might be readers from outside. We talked about how your audience is, you were thinking about Ghanaian women. But this question is actually also a question I had for you. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like working with your editors, publishers, good experiences or otherwise? And I guess maybe to broaden that a little bit, can you talk a little bit about your path to publishing, like how you found a publisher and what it was like and what editing was like?
Thank you for that question. My path, I think, was a bit unusual. I've written fiction for many years. I've been writing fiction for like 30 years. Most of what I've written, no one has read, and probably I won't show to anyone. But when I started my PhD program, I really wasn't writing fiction anymore, because it was so demanding. But nearing the end, I began writing fiction again, and I decided I wanted to publish, and I just went online and Googled how to publish.
We're all so glad you did that, though.
And I was writing short stories and sending them out, and then I was also working on the novel. But the answers I got off the internet made me think that my chances of publishing a novel were very slim, because they said you have to have networks and people will introduce you to agents and editors, and you have people who read your stories and give you feedback. And I only had my sister, who has a full-time job, and I would show up at her job and be like, stop what you're doing and read the short story now. I didn't have all of that, what the internet was telling me I needed. And then also I had a conflict, well, not a conflict, but a competition for time with my research and writing. So I came to a point where I said, I'm going to continue writing short stories and sending them out. And I think I stopped. I got so many rejections. I think I stopped counting after like 150 rejections on my short stories. And then I said, I will keep working on the novel, and I don't think I can publish it now, because it seems like finding an agent is so difficult and all of that. But I'll wait until I'm 65 and I retire, and then I will publish the novel. So that was the plan. The plan was I would just write a bunch of novels, and when I retire from academia, I would publish them somehow, because I will have time to like find an agent and all of that. But then my agent, who is awesome, saw one of my short stories and reached out to me. And that is kind of how the book, and I was halfway through the book by then, and I worked on it until it was completed. And she is awesome. She's also a great editor. So before the book went out, she did quite a bit of editing after I completed, like, I don't know how many drafts. So there was editing before I did get a publisher, and then had an editor who also edited it again. Yeah, so that's been my path to publishing, and now it's out. And I should say I started working I started thinking about a book, I think in 2011, but I began seriously writing at the end of 2012, early 2013. So it took me about 5 years to complete it.
Do you have any more time to write fiction now, or are you still feeling the pressure to do your academic work first?
I still feel the pressure, and I'm trying to. So right now, I think for the last 2 months, I haven't been writing fiction. I have been reading fiction, which I absolutely love doing. I haven't been writing. There's definitely the competition for time, and I'm trying to work out a system. I haven't worked out a system yet. What I had earlier in the year was from Friday afternoon to Sunday, I would write fiction, and then the weekdays were basically focused on my nonfiction, and it worked well. But it also meant that I was working most of the weekend. So I'm working I'm working during the week on social science, and then I'm working over the weekends on fiction. When I was writing His Only Wife, I was waking up at like 4 a.m. to write until about 6, and then I would switch over to nonfiction. But honestly, I don't have what it takes to wake up at 4 a.m. and begin working at 4 a.m. It's just, I can't. No, I shouldn't say I can't. I could, but I just don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think I think work-life balance is so important. I think, I'm going to say self-care. I know the term is so loaded, but for me, self-care is just like being nice to yourself and getting enough sleep, and not working, because I just worked crazy hours. I would work from 4 in the morning, then write nonfiction till like 8, and then go into the office and teach and meet with students and whatever, and then come back home and maybe write for another 2 hours. So I'm like from 4 in the morning to like 10 p.m. I'm working, and it's not sustainable. It's not healthy. So I've stopped doing that, and I've switched to weekends. And yeah, I don't know. Let's see how it goes. It's not perfect yet. I'm still working on it.
No, it's hard. And, I write on weekends sometimes too. And I feel like I think it's a break, but then sometimes it's very emotionally demanding, especially when you're writing scenes that are very emotionally demanding. And then you realize that you didn't get any rest and you have to go back to work on Monday. And it's like, I didn't have a weekend, right? Okay, more questions. Okay, go ahead. No, finish, please.
No, I was going to say that I found over time that it's not only the physical time, but it's the mental space. So sometimes I can have an entire day where I'm not doing anything, but I'm still tired just because most of my work is me thinking. And some days I'm just like, I just want a break from thinking. So it's not only like having the physical time, but it's having the kind of peace of mind to be able to think in a productive way and to write.
No, it's so true. And sometimes reading and getting away from the writing is what your brain needs to process what you're doing and to think, right? That rest. Speaking of, there's a question here. What have you both been reading? I've been reading Peace's book. So
yes, I have. So I was reading Shruti Swami's.
Oh, yeah, too.
Yes.
The House of the Body.
Yes, and oh my goodness, amazing! Because I had a conversation with her last week. I think, oh my goodness, time has gone. But yes, so that is a book that I read, and I have enjoyed the short stories. It's brilliant. And I'm also reading Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine. And it is such a beautiful book. And I'm enjoying that as well.
Nice. Before your book, the other book I read was The Death of Vivek Oji. Have you read that yet?
The
Death of Vivek Oji?
Oh, I haven't read. It's on my list. I have not read it yet.
It's so good. Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing. I'm just putting these in the chat too.
Good.
I always spell Akwetmi Messi's name wrong. I'll just put the thing in because I'm going to spell her name wrong. Okay, more questions. Okay, I know this can be I don't like answering this question, so you should feel free to answer it however you want, but can you share a little bit about what you're currently working on? And if it's not in a place that you can share, then.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I completed a second manuscript, and
Wow.
the reason I'm not writing now is because it's with my awesome agent who is editing. So I'm giving myself a break because of that. Yes.
Nice.
Oh, my agent.
Somebody's clapping for you.
Kylie.
So Kylie actually has a question for you. She says, do you have any guilty pleasure TV shows getting you through 2020? And then we have another serious question after that. I mean, this is also a serious question. I shouldn't say this isn't.
TV shows. I watch
guilty pleasure TV shows. So only bad TV shows.
Oh, I don't feel guilty about anything I watch. No. No guilty pleasures. I love I don't watch enough trashy TV. And I'm not going to say what trashy TV is. It'll probably get me in trouble. But I'm proud of everything I watch. Yesterday I watched, there's a new series called The Duchess on Netflix. And it's about a single mother in London. And I thought it was hilarious. But I don't feel guilty about watching it.
You don't feel guilty about watching it?
No,
okay.
No
That's a great recommendation. I'm watching a really trashy telenovela right now in Spanish. It's also on Netflix. It's called La Casa de las Flores. But I'm going to check out The Duchess now because that sounds really good. Okay, a more literary question, no more or less serious. Which do you like better, writing short stories or novels? Novel seems easier since you have more time to tell the story, but I'm interested in doing short stories too.
I like novels better. They allow me to spend way more time with my characters and to allow them to grow in different ways. And I mean, short stories, the characters also have a much bigger life, more than what appears on the page. But the novel allows time for exploration. Yes, so for that reason, I enjoy writing novels more.
Do you ever test? I know some authors do this, like test a character through a short story, and then you realize that there's more of a story there. Like, have in any of the short stories that you're published, have they become characters in novels, or are they very separate for you?
Well, so Afi, the character of Afi, I think there was a point where at the very early stage where it was I was thinking of it as a short story. But then as I was writing, I thought there's so much more here. And it became something much bigger. Yes, so at least it's happened once.
Okay. We'll see if it happens again. Well, I'm so glad it did happen because this is a great book. I wanted to ask you too. So when I read stories about women from India, they are often very, I don't know how to say this diplomatically. They're very stereotypical. They're not necessarily very strong women. And Afi is and all of the women in your book, they're such complex characters. They have strengths and they have weaknesses. And I was wondering if you feel that in African, or more specifically Ghanaian literature, do you feel like your characters are quite different, or do you feel like there is a tradition within literature now that's sort of exploring more complex female characters?
I do think that in what's being published now, but even I'm thinking about earlier works written mainly by women, like Amata Edu. I think much of this work featured women who were, strong characters. And I think it's a product of what exists in Ghana, right? And and there are different ways that we can define what it means to be strong, or what do you have to see someone is strong. But the fact is that most women, and that is what one of the points that I try to make in this book, that people, women, in ways big and small, are trying to make a way for themselves, right? And are trying to stand up for themselves. And sometimes we hear about the people who do incredible things, and that is great. And we need the books. We need all the books we can about the women presidents and women chiefs and women soldiers. Those are amazing. But the fact is that the average woman is getting up every day and working and trying to better herself and making, if she has a family, making a contribution to her family. And I think so that is what womanhood looks like in Ghana, and I think in many places. And that is why we see that in literature. And I think if one wrote a book in which all of the women were the opposite of strong and opposite of trying to achieve, I don't think it would be realistic. And this is not to say that every woman that you meet in Ghana is like waking up at dawn to, I don't know, go to work and save the world or whatever. I mean, it's just like anywhere else, just regular people just going about their day. But even the small things that they do matter and make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, everyone is the hero of their own story, right? So even regular women's stories, I think, are really, I mean, what you do in your book is like, not everybody is a strong woman, right? And everybody is complex and nuanced and layered, which is how people are in life, right? Which is why I found it so interesting to read. I was also curious so I read a lot of Indian work in translation, and that has sort of opened up a lot for me, because I unfortunately I can't read my mother tongue. Is there a tradition of Ghanaian work in translation, and do you read work in translation, or are you fluent in a Ghanaian language and read in another language?
Unfortunately, I'm not. I used to be fluent. This is where the nostalgia comes in.
Yeah.
So the Ghanaian language in the book is Ewe. I speak Ewe. I speak it, but to the point where I embarrass myself when I go home, because this everything is sprinkled with English, and it's just, oh my goodness, why is this happening? I used to be fluent. We were taught Ewe in school. We wrote Ewe in school, and now I can barely. I don't think I can write a letter. And one of the things I told myself was just go and get like primary school grammar books and start reading again, so that you can be better.
Yeah.
So all of that to say, I'm not reading books in Ewe, and it's a shame. I do wish I could. I'm not reading books in Ewe for the most part, and I think most of our literature, at least with fiction, is being written in English.
Okay.
And I think I think it's something that you see across Africa. This is not to say that like people are not writing literature in like African languages, but I think most of what is being produced in English.
Okay.
But it would be great if we could write in our various mother tongues and yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask one last question. I mean, I have a ton more questions, but I'm like looking at the time. So let me ask a question that could be a wrap-up question. But if you all have more questions, please go ahead and put them in the box, because I think we have a little bit of flexibility with time. So Peace, I just wanted to, my last question was, if you have any advice for authors, particularly authors who, like you, maybe aren't in a situation where they can write full-time, or I mean, I'm this way too, like, don't have an MFA. If they Googled publishing, they wouldn't necessarily be in the networks. Do you have any advice for people who are aspiring writers in those situations?
I think discipline is important. People, I get asked a lot about what inspires me, what keeps me motivated, and it's just saying I want to do this and waking up every day and doing it
at 4 a.m.
hopefully like get more sleep. But doing it even when, because like when I was writing this book, I thought I'll be publishing it in like 30 years. So the discipline, but also you have to, I think it's important that you love what you're doing. And I think if I didn't like writing, I wouldn't have spent, I don't know, 5 years writing a book that I thought I wouldn't be able to publish, but I'm going to write it because I like writing, right? So I think it makes a huge difference if you love what you're doing, if you love the story, if you love the characters. So then I think you need to be true to yourself and write what you want to write and not what, I don't know, what you think people want you to write. Because I feel like if you're writing what you want to write and it makes you happy, it's easier for you to wake up every day and do it. Whereas and I can think about some of the academic writing that I do where it's like, okay, I'm supposed to write this. I'm not excited. I mean, I love some of my academic writing. I love it. But there are a couple of pieces I've published where I'm just like, oh my goodness. I have to wake up and write this whatever paper, and I don't want to do it. I've never felt that way about fiction. Right? Because I love it. So there's and like I don't even know what writer's block is, to be honest.
That's amazing.
I don't, and maybe if I had more time to write fiction, then there will be times where I would struggle to write. But because I just have so little time, and I'm like, and what I do is during the week, I tell myself, if you're really good this week, you get to write fiction over the weekend, right? So it's like, I'm just looking forward to writing fiction.
Yeah.
Like there's no time for me to, there's time, but I just never find myself in a place where I'm not able to write because I've been looking forward to it for an entire week and I just want to do it. So anyway, that's just a very long way of saying, I think if you love it, if you love what you're writing, it makes a huge difference.
That's great advice. I've also heard that writer's block is very connected to fear. So I think if you're doing it out of love for writing, there's no fear there. I mean, I was really interested in what you said about how you just wrote this book for 5 years, like not knowing if it was going to get a publisher or not because you just loved writing it. So now that you're writing your second novel and you have a publisher, did that feel different knowing that there was a very, very good chance that this book could, like this book is most probably going to be out in the world. So did it feel very different to write it?
It didn't feel different, but there was a point where I had deadlines, most of them self-imposed, but for good reason. And I realized with my other writing, there are always deadlines, and I'm used to it. But I realized I don't like having deadlines for fiction. It takes away the fun. It takes away the fun, and I'm very protective of fiction. I don't want fiction to be like my day job, where I'm stressed out and I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to write and publish this. So I try to cushion my fiction life. So anyway, when I had deadlines, I realized, and I had deadlines because there was a chance that the second novel could be published. And when I was writing the first time, there were no deadlines because I was like, well,
right.
65 in like I don't know how many years. I can take my time.
Yeah, your goal was 65, right? So I'm assuming you had several decades based on.
Yes. So yes, the biggest thing with the second novel was having deadlines and realizing that I didn't like working with deadlines. So that also was different.
Okay. Okay, great. I don't think I have. I mean, I do have more questions, but I feel like they'll lead us on a kind of long path. Sam, do we have time for more questions, or shall we wrap up here?
We can. It's up to you both. If you want to keep going, we have.
What do you think, Peace? One more question? Or is it? I know it's late for you.
No, let's do one more question.
Okay. So my last question was, well, you have a nonfiction book coming out soon too, right? An academic book.
It's out. It came out in March. I need to update my bio.
Okay. Well, congratulations. Has that taken some of the pressure off in terms of like tenure and stuff like that? Okay.
Oh, yes. I definitely feel less pressure, but then at the same time I'm writing a second academic book.
Oh no. Do you ever sleep? I mean, this is amazing.
I sleep. I sleep now. Sleep is a priority for me, and I am an ambassador for sleep. People, we need to sleep. I'm telling everybody, get more sleep. Yes, I do sleep.
Okay. Okay. So my last question, speaking of sleep and speaking of making time for things, do you have any advice for people specifically about writing during COVID and forest fires and really important elections and murder hornets and just the crazy world that we're in now? How have you been coping? Like, it sounds to me like writing might be your coping mechanism. But have you felt like your writing has been off? Do you have any suggestions for people? And also, this is a very personal question because I feel like my writing schedule has been completely off. So do you have any advice for people about writing during this crazy time?
Well, writing, you're right. Writing has been my coping mechanism, but I think that you don't have to write, right? This is once again, it goes back to it being something that's fun, and probably because that's all I do, so I enjoy doing it. That and Netflix. Once again, I need more skills and talent. One of the things. But on a serious note, though, I think that if you're a writer and during this time you don't feel like writing, don't write, right? Like don't put pressure on yourself that you have to write, that you have to produce anything. I think just waking up and making it through the day these days is a major achievement. So
and sleeping.
And sleeping, yes.
Right.
Yes. So my thing is be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, sleep, and yeah. And whenever you feel like writing again, you write.
I feel like that's great advice and a great place to end. What do you guys think? Sam, what do you think? That seems like a great takeaway message.
Yes. Well, thank you both so much. This was an amazing conversation. I know it's great for all aspiring writers. Speaking as one myself, well, I'm a writer, but aspiring authors doing what you both are doing. This was a wonderful conversation, and thank you both for taking time out of your Saturday of all days. Really, really great to have you. And thank you everyone who's supporting independent bookstores right now, Black-owned bookstores right now. It's, every purchase helps keep us going. So please purchase His Only Wife and support Peace and Mathangi's book, which I put at the very beginning of the conversation. And this talk will also be here on our Crowdcast page. It will remain here so we can share again and rewatch and come back to it. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thank you, Peace. Thank you, Mathangi. It was wonderful to have you. Thank you so much
for having me.
Thanks.
Yes. Bye.
Peace, I hope we get to meet in person someday. This was really fun.
I hope so too.
And everyone keep writing.
Yes. And sleeping.
Yes, sleep. Sleep, writing, Netflix. All right. Take care. Thank you.